It appears that we are in a new era for the Denver Broncos as Sean Payton and company has essentially kind of flipped the script, made some serious roster changes, and are now looking towards the future of what Sean Payton's version of the Denver Broncos is going to look like. There is plenty to discuss in regards to what's been done in free agency, as well as how the Denver Broncos could be attacking this year's NFL Draft. So today, I'm diving into the Broncos, doing a little bit of a free agency review, and then giving my draft preview. So let's dive right in.
You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today, as I mentioned, we are diving into the Denver Broncos for a draft preview here. I'm going to do a little bit of a free agency review as well before we dive into that draft conversation, but I want to invite you, Denver Broncos fans, to get in on that conversation yourselves. Comment down below. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on the Broncos so far this offseason and where you expect them to go into this year's NFL Draft, so please feel free to fire away. And just before we dive in, as a reminder, I'm affiliated now with Fanatics NFL Shop. If you already plan on buying something from one of those two places, any sort of sports apparel, and you want to help support the show, feel free to use my links in the description down below or hit the QR codes over my right-hand shoulder here. But beyond that, let's dive right in. Beginning with the free agency review, we'll kind of go through this. I'll just kind of weigh in on what's happened here, give my thoughts on the matter. And I will say that when I look at the Denver Broncos as far as free agency is concerned, and I think it's important to talk about this because it obviously kind of sets up how you look at the draft. I really liked the signing of Brandon Jones, helping mitigate the loss of Justin Simmons. Obviously, they opted to release him to save themselves some money. He comes in on a 3-year, $20 million deal from Miami. You also see them bringing in a guy like Cody Barton, the linebacker from Washington. Pretty solid guy from them as well. That's kind of like mitigating the loss of Josie Jewell. You see them bringing a guy like Malcolm Roach from New Orleans as well. So some very modest additions, I would say, Brandon Jones being on the more exciting side of things, but you're also looking at those losses, as I mentioned. Center Lloyd Cushenberry's gone, Justin Simmons is gone, Russell Wilson, big change there, a lot of money being eaten up to get rid of him, Josie Jewell gone, Jonathan Harris gone. So a lot of I would say decently important to somewhat important losses that you would see from Denver, depending on how you kind of look at things and how the whole Russell Wilson experiment had gone. And then some very modest re-signings as well. Will Lutz sticking around in Denver, Adam Troutman being brought back, Lil Jordan Humphrey being brought back. Nothing that's really like setting off any massive bells and whistles and whatnot as far as to just what happened with free agency. Denver overall, I would say, had a more quiet free agency, barring some of the big moves as far as getting rid of Russell Wilson is concerned. But with $20 million still left to play with, I do think going through like this second and third wave of free agency, there's probably a good chance that we see maybe another addition or two. But it feels more like Denver is really looking at the draft and retooling the team that way before maybe making some final signings. So I really think that we're going to see some noise come from Denver in terms of what happens in this year's NFL Draft, more so than what we've heard from them going through free agency. So overall, I would say very average, very neutral type of free agency. Nothing really to write home about. Solid addition, some notable losses, but not anything too crazy by any means, barring the Russell Wilson situation. Now, as for the actual draft and taking a look forward into what could potentially be happening later on in April of this year, I think there is a lot of conversation to be had with what happens with that round 1 selection there at pick number 12. I have seen a lot of mock drafts, a lot of draft projections, whatever it may be, whatever you like to look at, with conversations surrounding quarterback, edge rusher, cornerback. I mean, it does not really seem like there are many definitive answers as to where this Denver Broncos team could ultimately go in round number 1. And with that being said, Patrick Surtain definitely makes me feel comfortable with not having to go cornerback in round number 1. I look at PS2 as one of the best corners in the NFL, and while, yeah, the idea of pairing him with another top-end draft prospect is really exciting, it's not necessary, at least when you look at the grand scheme of things and where Denver is right now. On top of that, there's obviously the conversation surrounding getting a quarterback in round number 1, and if you listen to the mainstream media right now, it literally feels like we're going to see some monster run on quarterbacks where we're going to see 6 guys go in the first round. That just seems to be the way mock drafts are looking and just the way the conversation sounds right now. And I'm here to tell you guys, I do not buy that. I do not buy it for one singular second. I feel like this happens every single year, and I've been caught up in the hype. And yes, we have seen some runs on quarterbacks, and even lately, but some teams have been burned by those runs, and I know that those teams, or just teams that watched other teams get burned, have that sitting in the back of their mind. So something tells me we are not going to see as many quarterbacks be taken in the first round as it's being made out to be. You're not going to tell me that every single one of the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in that conversation are all first round selections. I know teams are desperate to get that signal caller, but you are not going to sell me on that. That being said, I like focusing more so on the defensive side of the ball, specifically the edge, and I like looking at a pass rusher here. When you look at what Denver's pass rush did in 2023, 42 sacks, not necessarily the best by any means, but I wouldn't say the worst. I mean, when you look at the high end of the sack totals there, I believe the Chiefs led the way with about 60 or so, so you're not too far away from the best of the best there, but you're a little bit on the lower side of things. It's the pressure rate that really gets to me, sitting at just 18.2% of dropbacks, creating that pressure, 4th lowest in the NFL, where I think this is where we go, okay, you know what? Picking so high, there are some really good edge rushers in this draft, and at number 12, you have a really good opportunity to grab one of the best 3 guys in the draft in terms of edge rushers. And I like the idea of targeting Florida State edge rusher Jared Verse. I've seen a lot of places mock him to the Denver Broncos, and at 6'4" and 254 pounds, the guy has 18 sacks and 29.5 tackles for loss over the last couple of seasons. This one makes a lot of sense to me because Denver obviously getting rid of Von Miller not too long ago, and then ultimately Bradley Chubb as well to the Miami Dolphins. Your pass rush has been depleted. There is really not a whole lot to write home about, and the Randy Gregory experiment obviously did not work itself out last year as well. This is something that I think needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed sooner rather than later with one of those top-end talents. A lot of his weakness lies within the run defending side of things, according to scouts, so that is something he needs to deal with, but a lot of it is just technical issues from the way it sounds, which technique can be taught. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It's more so the physical traits and the intangibles, things like that, can't be taught, that you really want to worry about, but technique things you can work on. He's a refined pass rusher. He's praised for his pass rush planning and going and attacking offensive linemen with a plan in mind and successfully executing said plan, and that's something that I've seen from a lot of different scouting reports here. On top of that, as I mentioned, he is an incredible athlete, and those combine numbers showed that. You cannot teach big size with athleticism. It's one of those things where you either have it or you do not. Having cranked out 31 reps on the bench press as an edge rusher, and being 97th in the percentile of the broad jump. I mean, this is a guy who has explosiveness, he has power, he has strength, he's great with his hands rushing the passer. He blends that unique size and athleticism together really, really well. And this is someone who can help take that defense to the next level going into next season here. And it helps out your secondary, as I tell everyone. One of the best ways, and this is not my saying by any means, but something I always love to say, the best way to improve your secondary is to improve your pass rush, because if you can help them out and bring more pressure, you shorten the duration of time that they have to be in coverage. It only helps out not just one singular person, but everybody in the secondary. The second position and selection I'm going to focus on here, and this is probably going to necessitate a trade up into the second round here, because as I previously mentioned, I don't buy 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the first round. That really seems to be the narrative that's being pushed right now, and it really feels like smoke and mirrors. I could be completely wrong, and I have been many times. I've been right many times. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a guessing game when it comes to the NFL draft, but I do not buy the smoke and mirrors that is this run on quarterbacks we're going to potentially see in the first round. And with that being said, there are teams that need quarterbacks, yes, but there are also teams that don't need quarterbacks, that are willing to make some noise about quarterbacks to persuade those teams to waste their picks on said quarterbacks here so they can get the guy that they want to land at some other position. It benefits teams that do not need quarterbacks to help leak out information and say it's coming from other places to persuade the teams that need QBs to waste selections in the first round on guys that are not worthy of that first round pick. I know that's a lot of mental gymnastics, but it is something that rings very true, and you see it year after year after year with the number of selections that go to quarterbacks that should not have been drafted in the first round and got severely overhyped. And you don't have to look very far back for that proof. It's in the pudding as close as just a season or two ago. That being said, with a lot of consideration as to what I would like to see Denver do with this trade up here, it obviously will be quarterback here, as I'm alluding to. But I look at what Sean Payton does and his offensive scheme and just how quarterback friendly it is. I like the idea in the second round of going after someone that seems to be a pretty polarizing prospect at the quarterback position that I think ultimately winds up falling because of that polarization. And that's going to be Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. At 6'2" and 219 pounds, by no means prototype size at quarterback, a little bit on the smaller side, but not the smallest by any means, and certainly not the smallest quarterback that Sean Payton will have ever coached. And I'm not sitting here saying that J.J. McCarthy is the next Drew Brees, but it is something that's worth mentioning here. The biggest dot that I'm connecting between J.J. McCarthy and Sean Payton and what I know Sean Payton would like to see from his quarterback is going to be McCarthy's ability to take care of the football. With a nearly 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio over the last couple of seasons, this is something that I know Sean Payton is going to really enjoy from his quarterback and is something that he will see himself being able to work with here. One big thing when you look at his time with Drew Brees, and even with Russell Wilson just this past season, efficiency at the quarterback spot and being able to take care of the football is something that Sean Payton loves. And even just this past year with Russell Wilson, forget Drew Brees and all the success they had together, but even with just Russell Wilson this past year, it was a disaster with the Nathaniel Hackett season, but you saw the interceptions tank way down and those touchdown numbers go way up in that one season. Yes, it wasn't the greatest quarterbacking season by any means, but in terms of efficiency in setting up Russell Wilson for success, Sean Payton is able to do that, and that is something that is worth mentioning here. And when you look at just the completion percentage number, like if you want to look at some of the more simple things here, 72.6% in 2023, he tracked a better completion percentage year over year as a player during his time in Michigan. And for you stat nerds out there, I'm one of them there. His adjusted completion percentage was 80%. That's accounting for wide receiver errors leading to drops and what have you, poorly run routes, miscommunication, whatever it may be. A whopping 80%. That is a phenomenal number. Now, he's very young, 21 years old. He just turned 21 in January. That is obviously something you have to think about here, but this is why I'm talking about getting him in the second round. It gives you that leeway to bring him in, and he does not have to start. It's different when you draft a quarterback in round one. They have to be the starter. They have to be the guy. But if you're getting him in round two, you give yourself the leeway. Apparently, there is some interest with Jarrett Stidham, and Sean Payton is curious to see how he could work in his system. I don't really know how much I buy into that, but that is obviously something that's been talked about there. You, of course, have Ben DiNucci in the quarterback room as well. Spring football hero for those of you that know about that. But, I mean, when you look at J.J. McCarthy and just potential upside compared to some of the things you have to worry about, like polishing his ability to read defenses both pre and post snap, going through his progressions, things like that, he needs time. And for what I'm gathering with the situation in Denver, Sean Payton is going to be given that time to really build out this Denver Broncos team the way he's going to need to. I firmly believe that. So it's not like Sean Payton's on the hot seat. We need a playoff run this season. You can get a quarterback in the second round, give him time to develop, build the team around him that he's going to try and push this quarterback to the moon with, and get a guy in the second round like J.J. McCarthy. I understand this might not be the most, attractive selection to some people, and I'm sure a lot of people are not going to be the biggest fan of this selection here, but I think when you kind of lay out all the cards and some of the deficiencies that this team has, focusing on the defense, getting your premier edge rusher in round 1, and then looking at day 2 for your quarterback, probably in the second round, and a guy like J.J. McCarthy, there's a lot of really good things he's shown. Yes, the attempt numbers are really low compared to some of the more high-end quarterbacks that are in this draft class, but when I look at J.J. McCarthy and just everything surrounding him right now, he feels like a top of the second round type of quarterback. And I could see Denver maybe moving some capital around to be able to go and get him. They've clearly not been afraid to wheel and deal as necessary, so it's something that I'm definitely anticipating going into this draft. That all being said, one more position I'm going to look at here in player. We're going to move into day 3, and we're going to talk more so about getting value at a position that has a ton of upside in this year's draft class, and that is going to be wide receiver. After trading away Jerry Jeudy to the Cleveland Browns, I think wide receiver was probably one of the bigger positions worth talking about in this here. I typically only cover about 3 positions / players in each one of these, so wide receiver was one that was on the top of my list as well for Denver. It's been talked about over and over. Wide receiver depth is huge in this draft class here, and on top of that, you hear it more and more. Wide receivers are coming out more and more ready every single season, every single draft. They just all seem to be more ready to go into the NFL. There is one particular player that I look at that should be available within like rounds 4 to 5, that it would be an absolute whiff on Denver's end if they don't go after and grab. And that one guy in particular has a clear connection to Denver, and some of you probably already know where I'm going with just by saying that, and that's going to be Rice wide receiver Luke McCaffrey, the son of Broncos great Ed McCaffrey, the brother of San Francisco 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey. When you look at his switch from quarterback to wide receiver, there are some things that translate really well here, and something that we've seen from quarterback turned wide receivers before, having a really good understanding of what defenses are trying to do from their time as quarterbacks. It just translates really well. So you have that little bit of an instance there to think about. On top of that, when he made that transition, it was very clear he's an athlete, he can handle this, and on top of that, he excelled at it in the limited opportunity he had of just a couple of seasons. 58 catches, 723 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaging 12.5 yards per reception in 2022, then jumping to 71 receptions, nearly 1,000 yards, just 8 shy, 13 touchdowns, and a 14-yard per reception average. Football flows through the McCaffrey family blood, and I think that Denver would be extremely out of their mind to not go and get Luke after missing on Christian back in 2017. It's almost comical when you compare their combine numbers, just how similar the two are. Like, Luke's a little bit taller than Christian, but when you just if you go to NFL.com, pull up Luke and Christian, I don't have it to put on the screen here for you. Maybe I'll edit it in, we'll see. But when you compare the two numbers side by side, it's comical just how close they are in terms of athletes. And then on top of that, you look at what scouts are saying in regards to Luke McCaffrey and just his ability, the quickness, the agility, his ability to run routes. Who Christian has always been a great receiver, even though he's been a running back, and he's probably somebody who could literally play slot wide receiver if you wanted him to. But Luke, a little bit bigger, just as fast. He has the same ferocious running type of deal that you see from Christian. They both just kind of shoot out of a rocket, really tough to bring down type of guys. But again, Luke is a little bit taller. He's 6'2" to Christian McCaffrey's 5'11", 3 inches bigger, means he could play on the outside as a wide receiver or on the inside if you want to make him be a bigger slot guy. But with that 4.4 speed that he has, this is someone who can create separation. He's able to run routes very well. He's very agile. He's an effortless ball catcher. This is a guy that in rounds 4 and 5, because he's coming from a smaller school, is probably going to be available within that realm. But with the McCaffrey name and the pedigree that comes with it, the Broncos need to go and right their 2017 mistakes, wrongs, correct, and go and get Luke McCaffrey. I would love to see this pairing here. It just feels right to me. There are some concerns about his ability as a run blocker, and there are at times, he can be caught catching with his chest as opposed to catching with his hands, but there is really not a lot of negative things to say about Luke McCaffrey when you go out and look around at what some of the scouting reports are saying here. So go get him. Great depth for the wide receiver room. Somebody who I honestly think could wind up turning into a legitimate starting 3 wide receiver, whether it's a guy on the outside or maybe he becomes your slot guy, whatever ends up working out with him, bringing in Luke McCaffrey should be on the radar of Denver. But that's it for me. Again, Broncos fans, let me know in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? How do you feel the Broncos have done so far this offseason, and where do you see them going in the draft? Would love to hear all that and more and discuss with you all in that comment section. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.